Breaking news today. Mistaken thinking about bargaining with Putin. Repeated reports alleging a growing desire on the part of the West to pressure Ukraine into peace talks with Russia. Nezavisimaya Gazeta, November 24, 2022. mk.ru, April 25, 2023. Provide an opportunity to consider how such talks would actually play out. The key issue is, what do Western negotiators hope will happen by the end of the war? According to State.gov on May 3, the United States reaffirms its unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders, including its territorial waters. However, the future of relations with Moscow has been largely left unclear. To reach an agreement with Vladimir Putin, negotiators from Ukraine and the West, undoubtedly Western representatives would play an essential role here, would need to offer Russia something, as the negotiations at hand are not about Russia's full and unconditional surrender. Putin showing any goodwill and voluntarily pulling his claws out of Ukrainian soil is highly unlikely. Putin will only agree to negotiate if he is assured of new gains that will convince his elite and the Russian population that the war was worth fighting for. These would require, at a minimum, that Crimea and the annexed territories be recognized as Russian territory, and could also include demands that Ukraine be fully demilitarized and denazified. Kremlin.ru, February 24, 2022. Russian diplomats will increase their pressure on Ukrainian and Western negotiators with each meeting, increasing the risk of a breakdown in negotiations. And whoever starts the talks will get the blame for not doing enough to make peace happen. However, if Putin sees no benefit in abiding by such agreements, it is difficult to understand why he should. It's become abundantly clear that the leader in the Kremlin is not someone who negotiates or complies. The fragile system of international security and strategic stability has been destroyed, and a new arms race has been provoked, as a result of his repeated violations of international law, the Charter of the United Nations, international humanitarian law, and arms control treaties and commitments. UN.org, March 2, 2022. Pravo.gov.ru, February 28, 2022. ICC-CPI.int, March 17, 2022. That doesn't lend any weight to his arguments. Putin, like all dictators, can only communicate through threats and threats alone. Twitter, Mike_Pence, February 27, 2022. Senate.gov, February 16, so this is hardly news. When one side loses a conflict, the weaker side typically requests negotiations. Even if they agree to negotiate, strong parties never make the first move in such situations. Moscow views any public comments, reports, or leaks that indicate Western countries are willing or even desire to push Kyiv to negotiate with Russia as proof of a schism in the Western camp, Western weakness, and Western fatigue with the war. Putin keeps telling himself he can't change course because he's on the right path. Despite the West's overwhelming military and economic superiority, it will eventually capitulate due to internal weaknesses. Meduza, February 24. A quote from Russia's first foreign minister, Andrei Kozyrev: "Democracies prefer short-term risk aversion to long-term self-preservation." Twitter, Andrei Kozyrev, April 1. Any peace on Putin's terms, of course, would have significant international ramifications. For instance, the perception that Washington will take the time to weigh whether an armed confrontation with a nuclear power is in its interests would destroy Taiwan's confidence in U.S. and Western support in the event of a military conflict with China. "We don't want to broaden this war and certainly don't want to do anything to create a lot of conflagration," U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said recently. State.gov, February 23. The hopes that China will exert pressure on Putin and get him to negotiate peace are unrealistic. Realizing that as soon as the Russian issue is resolved, China will become a target of economic and political pressure from the United States, it is hardly in Beijing's interests to play on the same side as the West. As is customary, Beijing will make strong statements about the importance of negotiations, but behind the scenes, China will continue to back Putin. fmprc.gov.cn, February 24. Stopping the fighting in Ukraine could seem like a great idea if it meant less risk to Europe's safety and tranquility. Unfortunately, this is not correct. Putin's regime, not just Moscow's war in Ukraine, is a major obstacle to world peace. To maintain the repression of growing discontent, it has used all available means to ensure economic growth in Russia. Today.Mistaken, October 8, 2019. The regime employs carefully crafted propaganda in order to redirect the anger of the people. Putin's pseudo-historical fantasies and delusions of grandeur are reflected in the attack on Ukraine, but the attack itself is the objective result of the entire development of the Russian power vertical over the past 20 years. The problem can only be resolved permanently by eliminating its origin. The simple fact that the Russian elite and society know what may be in store for them under the current regime but have no idea what may come once it is gone is the foundation for Putin's support in Russia. DW, February 18. The obvious decision is prompted by the irrational fear of the unknown, which makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Putin may find this far more alarming than additional sanctions packages, so it's important to let these groups know they can leave the dark side and still have a future. First, Western governments should make it clear that they will not approach Putin or his representatives with an offer to negotiate unless they are officially invited to do so. Second, and perhaps more importantly, the West must remain steadfast in its commitment to this strategy. Third, it's vital to stress that the West is willing to negotiate with any post-Putin Russian government that shows a willingness to end hostilities and talk about a peace deal. Given that the war against Ukraine is unpopular with the public, this strategy, combined with the development of methods to remove those regime functionaries who would turn against the war from the sanctions list, could help split the ranks of Putin's elite. iStories. Media, September 29, 2022. Naturally, this should be done in the context of continuous military support for the Ukrainian armed forces, who, with this backing, should be able to hand the aggressor a crushing defeat. Once that happens, the possibility of bargaining from strength becomes more tangible. For some in the West, it may help to remind themselves that they are merely aiding the victim and that the conflict is between Russia and Ukraine. On the other hand, things look very different in the rest of the world. It is seen as a conflict between Russia and the West led by the United States in the eyes of the global South. These emerging powers are watching to see how the West reacts to Putin's challenge. It's not shocking that many people in these areas have little to no empathy for Westerners. As reported by DW on March 1, 2022 and by parliament.gov.za on March 17, 2022, many influential people expect the West to fail and be humiliated. The moment Western leaders decided to back Ukraine in this conflict, the West became directly involved in the conflict. There is no assumption of victory in this war. In a classic zero-sum game, if one side triumphs, the other must suffer defeat. Should Putin come out on top? The writer's bio. Former Russian diplomat Boris Bondarev recently resigned in protest of Russia's war in Ukraine. Born in Moscow, Mr. Bondarev earned his degree from MGIMO in 2002. From 2002 to 2022, he worked as a Russian diplomat, specializing in non-proliferation, strategic stability, and international security. As of right now, he is a political refugee. Article sourced from Eurasia Daily Monitor, Volume 20 Issue 76, The Jamestown Foundation.